The fluorescent lights in the conference room hummed too loud, the kind of sound you only notice when everything else has gone completely silent. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd pressed them flat against my thighs under the table, hoping he couldn't tell, but men like Calloway Voss noticed everything. "Close the door," he said to the man standing behind me. I heard the soft click of the latch, and suddenly the city noise from 40 floors below disappeared entirely. Just us, and that hum and the folder sitting open on the glass table between us. My own face looked back at me from a photograph. Me, 2 days ago, in a corner booth at a diner on West 34th, sitting across from a man I'd hoped no one connected to Calloway would ever see. "You want to explain this?" His voice was calm in the way that a flat stretch of ocean is calm before a hurricane makes landfall. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the photo. How had I ended up here? 6 weeks ago, I was nobody. I was Maeve Callahan, 28 years old, pediatric floor nurse at Mercy General, splitting a 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria with my younger sister Bia, counting quarters in the parking meter change tray to figure out if I could afford both groceries and Bia's new asthma inhaler this week. The answer was usually no, and I'd buy the inhaler anyway, and make rice and whatever was left in the pantry stretch until Friday. That was my life. Unremarkable. Safe, in the way that being invisible is safe. I should have called in sick the night this started. Bia had a school thing, a choir concert, and I'd promised I'd be there. But my supervisor had begged. Half the overnight staff had food poisoning. It was a catastrophe. She needed me. I'd texted Bia I was sorry, put on my scrubs, and gone in. It was past 2 in the morning when the trauma bay got a walk-in. Not unusual. What was unusual was the 4 men in suits who came in with him, and the fact that the man on the gurney, despite bleeding from a wound in his left side that had soaked through his shirt and jacket, was calmly on his phone. "Sir, I need you to put that down," I said, snapping on gloves. He looked up. That was the first time I saw his eyes. Dark gray like storm water. He looked at me the way people look at something unexpected, not threatening, just quietly recalibrating. "One moment," he said into the phone. Then he ended the call without another word to whoever was on the line, and he put the phone in his breast pocket, and he let me do my job. His name on the intake form was Cal Voss. I didn't know what that meant yet. The attending on call recognized him. I saw it in the way Dr. Harmon's hands went very still for just a second before he composed himself. He caught my eye across the gurney, and his expression said something I couldn't read. Later, in the supply closet, he said it out loud. "That man is Calloway Voss. I don't know what brought him to our ER and not to a private facility, but you are going to be polite, you are going to be professional, and you are going to forget you ever saw him. Who is he?" Harmon looked at me like I'd asked who the president was. His family runs half the construction and port logistics on the eastern seaboard, and the other half. He let that sit, the part that doesn't show up in annual reports. I went back to my patient. Cal Voss was sitting up now, which I hadn't told him he could do, pressing the gauze I'd given him against his side, with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. He watched me cross the room. "You're not scared," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm at work," I said. "I don't have time to be scared." Something moved through his expression, brief as a passing cloud. "What's your name?" I hesitated. My badge was right there. "Maeve." He repeated it once, quietly, like he was testing the sound of it. Then he let me clean and dress the wound without another word. By the time his private doctor arrived 40 minutes later, there was no trace of Calloway Voss in the trauma bay. The intake form had been removed from the system. I checked the next morning, and his entire visit was gone, like it had never happened. I tried to forget about it. I mostly succeeded. Then the envelope arrived at the nurse's station, addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single card. "Thank you for your care. CV." And beneath the note, a gift card to the pharmacy 2 blocks from Mercy General. Enough to cover B's inhalers for 4 months. I should have thrown it away. I knew I should have. I stood in the break room holding it for a long time, thinking about Friday, and the empty change tray, and B's breathing when the weather turned cold. I kept it. 3 weeks later, a man in a black car was waiting outside Mercy General when my shift ended. He handed me a note without speaking. "My employer would like to thank you properly. Dinner, if you're willing. No obligation. A phone number." Every sensible thought I possess said do not call that number. I called it. Dinner was at a private room in a restaurant on the Upper East Side, where the menus had no prices and a single candle sat on the table, and the windows looked out over Central Park going amber in the fall evening. Calloway Voss was already seated when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, which I hadn't expected, and pulled out my chair, which I also hadn't expected, and he did not look like a man who had been bleeding in my ear a month ago. He looked like someone who had never been inconvenienced by anything in his life. "You came," he said. "The envelope was kind," I said carefully. "I wanted to say thank you in person." His mouth curved, not quite a smile. "You mean you wanted to return it?" I had, actually. I'd brought it with me. I set the card on the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Keep it," he said, "please." Something in his tone made it a real request rather than a command. "You used your own break time to stay with me when I asked you not to wake a colleague for a third pair of hands. I owe you more than a pharmacy card. You don't owe me anything. It's my job. Then let me buy you dinner, purely out of personal preference." I should have left. Instead, I stayed for 3 hours, and I learned that Calloway Voss was quiet in a way that didn't feel like absence. It felt like attention. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He talked about the city, the way someone talks about a place they've studied rather than just lived in. He was funny, in a dry, almost reluctant way, like humor surprised him sometimes. He did not talk about his work, and I did not ask. When I got home, Bia was still up. She took one look at my face and said, "Oh no, what? You like him? I don't know anything about him." That's not what I said. She wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. I went to bed telling myself it was a one-time thing. A strange, nice dinner, nothing more. He sent flowers to Mercy General 2 days later. White peonies. I'd mentioned they were my favorite offhand, in the context of describing Bee's attempt to grow a balcony garden. I hadn't thought he'd been paying attention to that part. He had. That began 6 weeks in which my life transformed in ways I hadn't consented to and couldn't quite bring myself to stop. Calloway showed up in my orbit with a quiet persistence that was nothing like pressure. Or maybe it was exactly like pressure, but so gradual I didn't feel it accumulating. We had dinner 3 more times. He sent a car to take Bia to her college orientation when my car was in the shop, and I couldn't get off a shift. He arranged through some mechanism I still don't fully understand for Bea's college loan application to be fast-tracked and reconsidered. I confronted him about the loan. "I made a call," he said simply. "Calloway, you can't do that. Her file was misprocessed." I corrected it. "That is not." I stopped. I didn't even know how to finish the sentence. "You can't fix things in my life without asking me." He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Would you have let me ask?" The honest answer was no. That was the problem with the honest answer. I told myself I was being careful. I wasn't being careful at all. Then, 5 days ago, a man sat down across from me on my lunch break at a diner on West 34th and said his name was Agent Drew Callister, and he was with the FBI, and they had been watching Calloway Voss for 2 years, and they needed my help. I thought about that the whole cab ride to Calloway's building. I thought about it while the elevator rose silently through 40 floors. I thought about it while his assistant, a composed woman named Renata, who looked like she had never been surprised by anything, led me down a hallway and knocked twice on the conference room door and left me alone, with a folder on the table, and Calloway Voss sitting at the far end, watching me walk in. He already knew. That was the thing I understood in the first 3 seconds. He already knew I'd met with Callister. "Close the door," he said to the man behind me, and now I was here, the photo between us, my hands pressed flat against my thighs. "He approached me," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I didn't seek him out." Calloway was quiet for a moment. He closed the folder. "Tell me what he said." So I did. I told him everything. Callister's offer. Witness protection for Bea and me, relocation, a stipend, guaranteed safety, in exchange for information. His implication that Calloway would eventually hurt me, whether he meant to or not, that people in Calloway's orbit had a pattern of getting caught in crossfire. The photographs Callister had shown me, which I would not describe out loud because I couldn't, not yet, possibly not ever. When I finished, Calloway hadn't moved. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't parse. "And you didn't take his offer," he said finally. "I'm here, aren't I?" "You're here," he agreed. Then quietly, "Why?" The question was so direct it caught me off guard. I'd expected anger, interrogation. "Not that," Because I don't know what the truth is yet, I said, and I'd rather hear it from you than from a federal agent who wants something from me. He stood, slowly, and walked to the window. The city spread out below, late afternoon in November, all gray sky and yellow cabs and people moving in patterns too small to see from 40 floors up. He stood there with his back to me for a long time. My father died when I was 19, he said. Heart attack, officially. The family story. What it actually was. He stopped. Risa started. He was killed by his own brother. My uncle Martin, who had spent 15 years wanting what my father had built and finally decided waiting was no longer necessary. I didn't say anything. I waited. I spent the next 3 years making sure Martin understood what that decision had cost him. He turned back to face me, and his expression was not apologetic. It was honest, and somehow that was worse. I'm not going to romanticize it. I did what I did, and the people who helped Martin suffered for it, and I made sure everyone in our circle understood exactly what I was capable of. The photographs Callister showed me were of men who tried to finish what Martin started. His voice was flat. 2 years after I took control, there were 3 attempts on my life. I responded to all of them. He paused. I'm telling you this because you asked for the truth, and because I think you're the kind of person who would rather be frightened by the truth than comforted by something softer. He was right. I hated that he was right. The FBI file on me is real, he continued. The RICO investigation is real. What it doesn't capture is that for the last 18 months, I've been working with a private legal team to restructure every operation I inherited from my father. Not for the investigation, because... He stopped again. His jaw worked slightly. Because some things stop being worth the cost. What changed? I asked. He looked at me directly. I met a nurse who wasn't afraid of me. The room felt smaller than it had 5 minutes ago. That's not a fair thing to say, I told him. No, he agreed. It isn't, but it's the truth. I stood up. I needed to stand to have my own ground under my feet for this next part. Callister said people around you get hurt. He showed me documentation, incidents, injuries, people connected to your associates who were in the wrong place. Yes. Are Bea and I in danger right now? Because of you? He held my gaze. There is one active concern. A business partner from my father's era, a man named Terrence Foyle, who believes the restructuring threatens his interests, and who has made it known he considers pressure points on my personal life a legitimate strategy. He said it without softening it. You are a pressure point. I've had security on you for 10 days. I felt the blood drain from my face. I'm sorry? Discreet. You wouldn't have noticed. Calloway. You put security on me without telling me. Yes, because if I had told you, you would have refused. And Foyle's people had already driven past your building twice. His voice remained level. I was managing a threat you didn't know existed. I'm telling you now because you deserve to know, and because you came here for the truth. I turned away from him. I walked to the window he'd been standing at and looked out at the city, and tried to organize my thoughts into something that felt like a decision rather than a free fall. My sister, I said. Is she safe right now? Yes, I spoke to my security lead before you arrived. Bea is at her afternoon class. There are 2 people in the building and 1 outside. I closed my eyes briefly. She doesn't know? No. I turned back around. He was watching me with something I'd only seen in his face a few times. Not control, but the careful holding of something he wasn't letting out. Uncertainty. It was an unfamiliar look on him. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to let me explain things properly. Not like this. He gestured at the conference table, the folder, the cold architectural formality of the room. I want you to understand who I am and what I'm actually trying to build, rather than what Callister's file says I am. And then I want you to make a real choice. Not under pressure. Not with an FBI agent's offer sitting in the back of your head. And if I choose to take Callister's offer? After hearing everything? Something moved through his expression. Not anger. The closest word I had for it was grief. Then Bea and you will be protected regardless. I'll make sure of that, and you won't hear from me again. I studied him for a long time across the conference table. The city hummed 40 floors below us. Show me what you're actually building, I said finally. All of it, not just the version that makes you look better than the FBI file. His relief, controlled as everything else about him, was still visible if you knew where to look. Come with me. He took me up 2 floors to a space that looked nothing like the sleek executive offices I'd passed through. It was cluttered with whiteboards and file boxes, and 3 people in their 30s who looked up when we entered with the easy familiarity of people deep in a project. Calloway introduced them as his restructuring team, a former federal compliance officer named Renata, a forensic accountant named Patrick, and a woman named Sloan who had spent 12 years in port logistics law. For the next 2 hours, he showed me what they were doing. He didn't hide the parts that were messy or slow or not yet resolved. He showed me the operations still in transition, the ones that were clean, and the ones, bluntly labeled on one whiteboard in Sloane's handwriting, that had to be shut down entirely because there was no legitimate version of what they were. How long? I asked, looking at the board. Another year for the major transitions, Patrick said, glancing at Calloway. 18 months if foil creates delays. We're far enough in that it's not reversible either direction. We've already cut ties with people who are angry about it. Is that why foil is a problem now? Because you already started? Yes, Calloway said from behind me. He was my father's oldest partner. He thought I'd run this indefinitely the way my father did. When I didn't, and when I started removing the pieces he depended on, he let the sentence complete itself. I turned to look at him. You knew starting this would make you more vulnerable, not less. Yes, and you started it anyway. I told you, he said, his voice quiet. Some things stop being worth the cost. We left his team still working and took the elevator back down. He didn't speak. I didn't either, because I was trying to hold everything I'd learned in the last 3 hours in some shape that made sense, and it kept shifting. In the lobby, before I could figure out how to leave, he said, "There's something else I want to tell you. Not about the business." I waited. I have a brother. Half-brother. He's 11, from my father's second relationship. The family doesn't acknowledge it. His mother struggles. His name is Owen. He looked at the middle distance rather than at me. I've been trying to formalize a support arrangement for the last 2 years. My father's remaining loyalists consider it an insult to the family name. It's one of the slower fights. I thought about an 11-year-old who had nothing to do with any of this, living on the edges of a family that wouldn't claim him. What's he like? I asked. Calloway's expression did something I hadn't seen it do before. It went open. Genuinely open, for just a second. Argumentative. Reads constantly. Talks back to every adult he meets, including me. A pause. He reminds me of myself at that age, which is not entirely reassuring. Despite everything, I almost smiled. We stood in the marble lobby for a moment, the foot traffic of a midtown Manhattan building flowing around us. "I owe you a real dinner," he said. "Not a negotiation, not a debrief. Just." He paused, seeming to choose his words with unusual care. "A chance to be a person rather than a situation." "You are a situation," I said. "I know." His eyes held mine. "But I'm also trying to be something else, if you're willing to let me." I thought about Bia, in her class right now, unknowingly protected by people I'd never met. I thought about the whiteboard 2 floors up. I thought about a half-brother named Owen who got talked back at and read constantly. "I need to talk to Bia," I said. "She has the right to know what she's been living next to, and then I need to think, of course, and Calloway." I held his gaze. "If there is ever again a situation where my safety or Bia's is being managed without our knowledge, you tell us. Even if you think we'll refuse. That's not negotiable." He was quiet for just a moment. "Agreed," he said. Not reluctantly, like it was something he'd already decided and was simply confirming. I nodded, and I walked out into the cold November air, and I pulled my coat around me and stood on the sidewalk and took a breath that shook a little. My phone buzzed. "Bia, how did it go? Did you actually talk to him?" I typed back. "Coming home. I'll explain everything." Then I started walking toward the subway and tried to figure out when, exactly, a person in my position started being defined by the situation rather than by themselves. The answer, I thought, was never. You just had to keep insisting on it. The conversation with Bia lasted 4 hours. I told her everything, beginning to end, and she sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets, her thinking spot, always is, and let me get through all of it without interrupting, which was how I knew she understood. It was serious, because Bia always interrupted. When I finished, she said, "Are we in danger right now?" "No, he has people on the building, without asking us." "Yes," I told him that was over. She was quiet for a moment. "Did he agree?" Yes, she looked at me. Do you believe him? I thought about the whiteboard. About the forensic accountant named Patrick, and the compliance officer, and the restructuring team and the year-and-a-half timeline, and the fact that none of it had been presented to me in the way someone presents things when they're trying to make themselves look good. It had been presented to me the way someone presents something when they need a real answer from a real person, and they can't get that without being honest. I think so, I said. I need more time to be sure. Bae stretched her legs out and studied the ceiling. He sounds terrifying. He is. Do you like him? I didn't answer right away. That was an answer in itself. Vea said, which was her way of saying, I hear you. I'm not going to push, but we both know what that means. I called Agent Callister the next day and told him I wouldn't be proceeding with his arrangement. He was professional about it in the way that barely concealed how unhappy he was, and he gave me a card and told me if I changed my mind, or if anything happened, to call. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called Calloway and agreed to dinner, not because I trusted him entirely, not because the fear had resolved into something clean and comfortable, but because the thing you learn on a hospital floor, if you work there long enough, is that waiting for the situation to become safe, before you engage with it, means waiting forever. Everything is risky. The question is whether the particular risk in front of you is the kind that belongs to you. This one, I thought, might be mine. Over the next 3 months, Calloway Voss proved more complicated and more consistent than I was prepared for. He was still controlled, still watched every room from the moment he walked in, still went quiet in ways that could be unsettling. If you didn't know by now that it meant he was thinking rather than withdrawing. But he also showed up, physically, practically, in the small ways that cost something. He came to Mercy General one night when a patient I'd been close to for months didn't make it, and I was sitting in my car in the parking garage unable to drive. He just sat in the passenger seat and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. He drove me home and came up only long enough to make sure Bia was there, and heated something up from the fridge and left. No conversation about what it meant. Just presence. Bia, who had been appropriately skeptical from the beginning, softened around month 2. She told me this had happened. Calloway had apparently arrived at our apartment, once while I was delayed at work, and Owen had been with him. His half-brother was visiting for a long weekend, and Bia and Owen had talked for 40 minutes about the Bugzitries they were both obsessed with, and by the time I'd gotten home, Owen was refusing to leave until Bia gave him her reading recommendations. Calloway had watched this exchange with an expression Bia described as shocked, then sort of undone. He loves that kid, Bia said, simply, like genuinely loves him. You can see it. I know. That's hard to fake, I know, I said again. The foil situation resolved over 6 weeks that I only partially understood even after the fact. All I knew during it was that Calloway was harder to reach, that his security presence around Bia and me tightened without comment, that there were 2 days where he didn't come home until after 3 in the morning and said only it's handled, go back to sleep. I had questions I didn't know how to ask yet. Some of them I thought I might never ask. I was learning to hold the parts I understood and release, not accept, not ignore, but genuinely release. The parts that existed in a world I didn't want to enter. It wasn't a perfect equilibrium. I don't think it was supposed to be. What it was real. The night of the Voss Family Foundation Gala, standing in front of the mirror in the dress Calloway had arranged for. I had specifically told him I did not need him to arrange a dress. But there it was, steel blue silk that fit like it had been tailored to my measurements, which of course it had. I thought about the version of myself from 8 months ago. The one counting change in the cup holder. The one standing over a stranger at 2 in the morning with no idea who he was. I didn't look different, not really. But something behind my eyes had shifted, a kind of solidity I hadn't had before. Calloway appeared in the doorway. He was in a dark suit, more formal than I usually saw him, and he stopped when he saw me in a way that felt involuntary. You look, he stopped. Don't say it like you're surprised. His mouth curved. I was going to say exactly like yourself. Which is the highest compliment available. I turned back to the mirror and clipped on the earrings he'd given me that morning, a small sapphire each, nothing ostentatious, perfectly like him. Is Owen coming tonight? I asked. He's already downstairs. He has asked 3 times whether there will be good food. and twice whether he has to talk to anyone. A pause. I told him talking to people is optional and good food is guaranteed. I smiled at my reflection. He's going to be sitting with Bia the whole time, isn't he? Almost certainly. A beat. Is that all right? I turned around. Are you asking if I mind that my sister and your brother have basically adopted each other? He held my gaze, and the thing behind his eyes was something I recognized now because I'd learned to look for it. That careful holding, the thing he didn't let out easily. I'm asking if this, all of it, is something you can see yourself in. Not just tonight. Not just right now. The question was enormous, and he had said it very quietly. I crossed the room to him and put my hand flat against his chest, over the lapel of his jacket, and felt his heart beating faster than he would ever admit. I'm still figuring some of it out, I said honestly. I know. His hand covered mine. So am I. But yes, I said, I can see myself in this, I can see us. He breathed out slowly the way he did when he'd been holding something for too long. Then he bent his head and kissed me, careful and unhurried, the way he did everything that mattered to him. Bee's voice carried from the hallway. If you guys are doing the moment, Owen is timing you, and he says it's been 45 seconds and he's starting to feel awkward. Calloway pulled back, his expression caught between dignity and genuine amusement. And I laughed. Really laughed, the kind that makes your whole chest work. And I thought, this is it. This exact thing. Not the gala or the penthouse or the sapphire earrings. This. We went out into the hallway, and Owen, 11 years old and reading a paperback he'd apparently brought to a formal event, looked up at both of us with the frank assessment of a child who has but decided what he thinks, and is not going to pretend otherwise. Finally, he said, and went back to his book. Calloway put his hand at the small of my back, and we walked toward the elevator. Bia already debating with Owen about whether he was allowed to read during the speeches, and the four of us, mismatched and unlikely and entirely real, went to meet the world together. There is a thing that happens when you've spent your whole life being responsible. You build this assumption that good things, real ones, the kind that last, have to be earned by suffering first, that they have to arrive through some clear linear sequence of safety and certainty. You wait for the ground to be solid before you take a step, but the ground is never solid. Not really. You just get better at walking on it. I am still a nurse at Mercy General. I still have shifts that break my heart a little. I still argue with Calloway about exactly one thing every week minimum, and he argues back, and it turns out arguing with someone who actually respects your position is one of the stranger and better experiences available. Owen is with us most weekends now, and the custody arrangement that Calloway spent 2 years fighting for is almost finalized, and the thing Owen does when he comes through the door. This small, barely visible exhale, like he can stop holding himself so carefully here, is something I will never get used to, and I never want to. The whiteboard in Calloway's restructuring office has fewer operations on the left side now than the right. Sloane told me, with a satisfaction she didn't bother containing, that they were 18 days ahead of schedule. Some things don't get wrapped up cleanly. There are still days when I understand less than I'd like to. There are still questions I hold at a distance, because I don't have a language for them yet. But there are also Tuesday mornings when all four of us are in the kitchen at the same time, and Owen is arguing with Bia about something inconsequential, and Calloway is standing at the counter with coffee and the kind of quiet that isn't absence at all, and I catch him watching us, all of us, this specific configuration of people that didn't exist a year ago, with an expression so unguarded it stops my breath. We are building something. It is ours, that is enough.